roots of Guyana's history are still hidden, waiting to be unearthed. Welcome to Oral Tradition and welcome to another adventure in Guyanese literature. And for this adventure, let's also welcome Thomas Hardin, author, anthropologist, journalist, and rights activist, who will take us on this adventure to an incident that happened almost 200 years ago that has left its impact, or the impact is still felt today. Thomas, welcome to the program.
Well, thanks so much for inviting me.
You're welcome. Welcome again to Guyana.
I'm so glad to be back.
Good. Why another book on slavery?
I mean, that's a really good question. And for me, this story started when I learned about my mother's family, who in the 19th century, they had a tobacco business. And the tobacco almost certainly came from North America, from the Virginia plantations, which were worked by enslaved people. And this was a total surprise to me. Over the last few years, I've been writing books about my father's family. They were German Jewish, they were in Berlin, and they experienced the horrors of Nazi Germany. My grandmother was thrown out of university. My great grandfather's business was taken from him. He was a doctor. They were forced to flee the country, and members of my family were killed in the Holocaust. I'd always been looking at myself, our family, as the victims, and now the shoe was on the other foot. So I started reading up about slavery, and I have to tell you, I'm embarrassed to say how little I knew. I knew about slavery in the States. I'd watched the movies Gone with the Wind and Django Unchained, 12 Years a Slave. I knew a little bit about the triangular slave trade when I was at school, but I never learned about the Caribbean and what happened, what the British had done in the Caribbean. We had been told that we were the good guys, William Wilberforce, the great abolitionist, and all his associates. So I wanted to find out more about slavery. I was really struck about how little I knew. And so I started looking into Britain's role. And that quickly took me to various uprisings and rebellions around the Americas. I was interested in uprisings because I wanted to hear what it was like from the enslaved person's point of view. Mm-hmm. And I found about Nat Turner's rebellion in Virginia and elsewhere. And then I came across the British colony of Demerara. And what struck me, what was so extraordinary, was just there was so much material, original material. And from that, I hope to build the story.
Mm-hmm, 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 mm-hmm. Yeah. Before we go into the book, Thomas, let's look at the cover. Talk about the cover design.
Yeah.
It's a hog's head.
Yes.
With a chain around the head.
Yeah.
There's a lot going on this cover for me. All right. White Death, the Demerara Uprising, Britain's legacy of slavery. Talk about this design.
I'm so glad you're asking, because I think cover designs are so important for books. And, I've been involved with a few books now, and it's such an interesting conversation, and different designers come up with different concepts. Mm. Two of the important things that we really wanted to look at was the history, the historical side. Mm-hmm. But we also wanted to have the contemporary side. What is the legacy of slavery? How did Britain roll in slavery? What happened in Guyana and around the Caribbean? How does that impact us today? Mm-hmm. The central character of this story is Jack Gladstone. And his job was as head cooper on one of the estates, on the Success Estate, along the Atlantic coast. And so we thought it'd be really interesting to do something.
As a cooper, he was skilled in making that very
Exactly. I
concept.
mean, his job was literally making wooden barrels, including these enormous barrels called hogsheads. So these hogsheads, I mean, you may know this. This was new to me. They made these really big barrels to contain the sugar and transported them back to Britain. And the reason they were so big is they were trying to stop smuggling. So when the boats were outside the dock, they were worried that smugglers might try and take a few barrels, so they made them so big that they would sink the little boats they were in. Hence the hogsheads. And these things were enormous and very difficult to make. So Jack Gladstone was a very skilled carpenter, and he'd been taught by his father Kwamana. But the making of the hogsheads and the sugar industry is very much at the center of this story, of course. And one of the reasons, not to get too quickly into it, but one of the reasons we wanted it on the cover was that sugar is really we wanted to surface it as part of the story. Now, of course, the chain is there for obvious reasons because of slavery. And the idea is to kind of evoke some of those ideas, to trigger that imagination in people. And we wanted a very plain, very simple cover to really focus people on the story,
Yep.
to really kind of put that in stark relief. One of the conversations we had is, should we put a picture of a person on the cover? Should it be of an enslaved person? Should it be of a slaveholder? Should it be one of those pictures there's these pictures of enslaved men and women working in the sugar plantations, but they're all so romantic. It looks so jolly and beautiful. And of course, that's not what it was like at all. So I'm so glad you asked me that, because there's a lot of discussion went into that decision making.
Good.
What do you
Good.
think? Do you like the cover?
Yes, that's what I'm saying. There's so much you can read into this cover.
Yeah.
Thomas, let's now open the book. I like. Oh boy, I like this. I like this. It opens like a movie, panning and zooming, with the maps, Atlantic world, Europe, Africa. There's the triangle there, the West Indies, and then you zoom into Guyana. You zoom into the estate where the uprising happened, and on the estate itself, success. Then you zoom in more on to the buildings, Smith's home, the fields, Bethel Chapel, Jack's home, the windmill, and things like that. And also you showed us the distance from Georgetown to the estate. As I said, I like how it opened like a movie, and I think you've go on.
Well, can I just say again, I am so happy that you paid so much attention to this, because one of the things that, when you're writing a book, you think about all these things so much. And, the maps that I have to speak to a cartographer, somebody who made maps. And when in the history books, I couldn't find any maps of the estate, the estates I was looking at. There's this person called Joshua Bryant who wrote a book about the uprising in 1824, the year
Yeah.
after the uprising.
Yeah.
And he gives a much wider view. But I wanted to know, what was it like to be on the estate? Where were the buildings? How did they relate? How did they relate to each other? What would it have been like for Jack Gladstone? So when I went to Guyana, I actually walked across the land. I wanted to see how wide it was, because these estates were very, very narrow but long. So it only takes 15 minutes to walk across them from side to side, but it's 3 miles long. And when I was talking to the map maker, we really wanted to give a sense of what it was like. Where are the canals? Where are the drainage ditches? Where would the estate manager's building be? It would have been right near the public road, but then the enslaved people's houses would have been further back towards the sugarcane fields. So all that's super interesting to me. And I worked with the historic artifacts, but I also worked with some specialists today who were very familiar with the sugar estates, who worked those exact sugar estates. And we went out there together. And I was very lucky to have a chance to go out with these people. And I'm so happy that you picked that up.
On that same thought, you inserted yourself into this story,
Yeah.
and it was a fantastic move on your part.
Really, I'm so glad you said that.
You came to Guyana. You inserted yourself in this journey because, as I said earlier, it's an adventure from then,
Yeah,
2,200 years ago, on to present day.
yeah,
This is history. This is history in the making. All
right.
right. So I like that. And then there's a lot of study. I mean, you had practice with your previous books.
Yeah,
Congratulations on those books. I've never seen them, but
thank you,
I've read about them.
thank you,
So
thank
you
you.
had a lot of practice, and you can see the practice coming into play right here. The book is divided in three parts: the arrival, um, the the uprising, and the trial. Right. Then I'm seeing this thing like it's set for a stage play, cast of characters. You know what I mean? You are inviting the reader into your story, and you're
Mm,
already there, and you're inviting the reader. You're not leaving any stone unturned because you want us to get. You're hoping, and we come to that. What you hope to do, what you hope to do with this book, what you hope to do with your research, with your advocacy. You know, we'll come to that.
yeah,
Introduction, prologue, epilogue. I will talk about the epilogue because it brings us back to present day. What happened to those people? So we
yeah.
look at the epilogue. So let's go into the book. Take us into the book now. Take the reader into your book, into your story.
Okay. Well, I mean, the book has, as you say, three parts, and there's four main characters. And it's told over the time period of just before the uprising in the summer of 1823 until about a year afterwards. And the four main characters are Jack Gladstone, who was this enslaved man. He lived at the Success Estate with his father Kwamina and his father's wife. And we see what it's like to live on the estate. And I write narrative non-fiction, so it's the everything that I include is factual. So everything that all the words, all the speech I use is quoted verbatim from a historical source. So
Yes.
one of the reasons I was so attracted to this story was because we had access to these records. In Jack's case, after the uprising, there was a series of court martials, and Jack appeared in those court martials. So we hear what it was like from his point of view. He describes the event, he reports his own speech and other people's speech. And that way, I'm able to construct and reconstruct what it was like. Uh, the second person is John Smith. He was the white missionary who came from England, who was based at the next door estate, Le Souvenir. And he was very sympathetic to the enslaved people. He was disgusted by slavery. Uh, and one of the things that was important to him and his wife Jane was to help the enslaved people read and write and to support them day to day. And then he gets caught up in the uprising. And we're very lucky to have his point of view because he wrote a journal with over 60,000 words. So we get to hear it from his point of view. The third person is John Gladstone. John Gladstone was a politician in Britain, very rich. He had over 7 huge estates in Demerara. There was over 2,000 enslaved men and women registered in his name. And he was very much a pro-slavery advocate. And the fourth person is John Cheveley. John Cheveley he came from a poor white family in England. His father lost his farm, and he'd been sent to Demerara just to get a job. And he turns up very naive, very young, very homesick. He ends up working in a general store as a clerk, and then he gets caught up in the uprising because he's enlisted in the British militia, and he sees firsthand what the British militia do during the uprising. And we're very lucky to have his memoirs that he wrote later on. So we have these extraordinary sources for these four people.
Still on that thought, reading those documents, we come to language, the use of language in the book.
For me, I mean, words are really important.